Welcome to Amber Escapes. Today I am going to be showing you the very basics of crochet, including the very first 4 stitches that you may need to know. With those first 4 stitches you can do pretty much any crochet project and read any pattern. So you'll need 3 things for this project: yarn, scissors, and a crochet hook. Starting with the yarn, I would pick for your very first project the most basic yarn. This is the stuff that comes in bulk on the shelves at your craft stores. I mean, there's just rows and rows of this plain looking yarn out there, medium sized. On the back side here you'll see most yarn has suggestions for what size crochet hook to use. So we'll be reading this line here. So it's suggesting a 5 millimeter crochet hook. You can use anything that's kind of close to that range. The crochet hook I usually like to use, I like to go up a little bit bigger. I'm using a 6 millimeter here. So as long as it's relatively close to whatever your yarn is suggesting, it's still going to turn out pretty good. The reason I recommend using this very plain cheap yarn is because A, you're going to screw up. Your first project is not going to look good, and it is the easiest yarn to work with. It's going to slide the best, and it's nice and cheap. Even like your little baby yarn, you can see that this is quite a bit thinner than our other yarn here. Black is probably a terrible color to use here, but you can see how much thicker this black is. Your baby yarn is going to make a much smaller project. It's going to be a little bit harder to work with. You start getting too bulky, you're going to need some big hooks. You know, it's got quite a bit of texture to it. Stay away from that kind of stuff for your first project. Definitely don't go fancy with the glitter. Even I struggle using this kind of stuff, even with the years of experience that I have. So very first project, go with your bog standard yarn. You know, you can go with any brand. I just go with the Hobby Lobby deals that are going at this time. So I love this yarn, is a pretty popular one there. As far as crochet hooks go, all these you can get at your craft stores. You can buy them individually. I like these ergonomic ones that have a bigger handle. Now we'll actually start crocheting. So I have my hook and I have my yarn. If you have just the one hook, that's fine, but if you bought a set and you have a larger hook, I suggest using that. In my experience, I kind of like to cheat. The first row isn't too hard to make, it's the second row that is the hardest, and I found that the bigger the loops are in your first row, the easier your second row is. So I have just a big 10 millimeter here. This is the biggest one that I really use. I do have some that are bigger, but I found that 10 mil is pretty safe for most projects. So we'll take our hook, whether it's your regular sized hook or your big hook, and we'll just loop our yarn over so it kind of locks that in place. Yarn over our hook and pull that through our loop there. So now we have a nice knot. I pull that tight to lock everything in place. Now I'm just going to make a square. One row is going to be a different kind of stitch each time. Since we're going to do 4 different stitches, I'll just increasingly show you the next stitch with every row that we do. I'll also throw in a color change to show you how that works during your projects. So now that we have our first stitch on, we want 10 stitches in this project, but we're actually going to do 13 chain stitches. For every row, you would add 3 chain stitches. So we'll go ahead and just count those out. Alright, so here we have 13 stitches. As you can see, it's not the straightest line, it's not the prettiest. Yours probably looks something similar, or maybe not even quite like this. that is okay. Starting out, everything's going to be ugly. Mine most definitely was. That's why I suggest starting with this very standard yarn, something easy to work with, not quite an actual project. You just kind of want to get into the groove of crocheting. So we have our ending loop here on our dominant hand. I'm going to go ahead and throw in my regular sized hook now. So there's two different sides to this chain stitch here. So there's our top side, which you can see kind of looks like a braid almost. So there's two different what looks like strings going through there. Our back side kind of looks more like a chain. So we have a round outside and then the center part kind of pops out. Some people, when they're starting their actual stitches, like to put through those top two because it's more like you crocheting your actual stitch. You'll see that once we actually get going on our second row here, what the top of stitches looks like. Others prefer to go through to the bottom side and take that one that looks more like a chain. That way their work looks more even. Looks like it has like a top stitch, the top of a stitch on the top of the work and on the bottom. I prefer it this way, where you're actually grabbing that chain stitch on the very bottom, so then you have the two strings on the other side. If you're just getting started, and take this part for example here, you can't tell which string is which, just pick a hole, put it in, make sure at the end of your chain you have 10 stitches. This second row is going to be the hardest. This is where most people just give up crocheting. Everybody that I've taught, if they were going to quit crocheting, they'd get to the second row and be like, that's it, I can't do it, I don't want to do this anymore, it's too hard. But we will work through this today, guys, so don't worry. All right, so again we have 13 stitches here. So we're going to skip the first 3 stitches. So we have 1, 2, 3 here, and our fourth one is here. So I'm going to go through the bottom. So now it looks like I have 2 loops on here. So I have that very first one that I did, and then the bottom of that chain. Now I'm just going to loop my string through and pull through both. This is called a single crochet stitch because you're just making a single crochet. So we'll go ahead and start sticking our hook through some holes. Whichever ones you can really grab at this point is completely fine. We can work on the finer points as we grow more experience. But we'll just work through this second row. So again, sticking it through the bottom and pulling through all of our work. All right, so here we have 10 stitches. Now I'll kind of show you how I count these, because it might be confusing because you're saying, well, technically I only made 9. This first stitch here is actually your chain going up, and that counts as a stitch, like a chain there. And as you can see, our top here, we kind of have that nice braided look, and that's going to be much easier as we go to stick our crochet hooks through. So once we get to this top part, we're going to do 3 more chain stitches, and that will get us up to our next row. So this is already our first stitch here, 1 of 10. So now we're going to learn our half double crochet. That sounds really confusing, but the stitch itself is very simple. So for this half double crochet, we are going to put our yarn over but ignore it for now. Now this first stitch actually counts for this loop here. So we're going to skip it and put our hook through our second, what looks like a braid here. So now we have 3 strings on our hook. We'll loop around and pull through all of them. So our last row was 2 stitches, or 2 strings on our hook and pulling through. So this one is 3, so it's going to be a little bit taller of a stitch. And now that we're on our 3rd row, we can just go ahead and continue on going through those 2 strings right at the top that look like braids and pulling through to make our half double crochet stitch. And we'll go through that final stitch here. So there won't be that nice braid at the end. I always just put it through that larger hole there at the end of our stitch. Now we're going to do our color change. At this point you've already learned 3 different stitches: our chain stitch, our single crochet, and our half double crochet. So to do a color change, we'll go ahead to the point where we had finished, where our hook is nice and tight in our work, and I leave about 1 inch to 2 inches of yarn of our old color. And I will wrap that around like I'm going to do a chain stitch, but I'm also going to put the second color on. And I'm going to pull both of them through. I pick apart my first color and pull that off and pull it very tight, leaving just the 1 loop of yarn on my hook here. So now I will do 3 chain stitches going up into my next row here, and I'll pull these pretty tight, making sure that they're knotted very good. Whenever I take my hook out of my work to do something with my hands, I always make my loop really big. That way I don't accidentally pull it, shrink it down, and pull all of my work apart. Now to just strengthen these this color change, I will just do a really simple quick knot here to make sure that they don't come apart. And now we can put our hook in. Now we have these ends here, and you can either leave them out, but a really easy thing to do is to just work them in to your project here, so then you don't have to deal with them later. So our next stitch is going to be the double crochet. This is probably the one that is used the most in work and is the one that I do the most. So we're going to start it just like our half double crochet and yarn over our hook. Now again, since this is considered a stitch, we're going to skip that very first braid here and go into this second one here. So with our yarn over, we're going to go under. Now I'm trying to make sure I have these strings kind of contained here, so then they're stuck in my work. So these are just going to lay down really nicely along all of this and get tucked in along here. But as you can see, this is started exactly like a half double crochet. We have the 3 strings on our hook here. So instead of pulling through all 3, we're going to pull through 2 and then pull tight. And then we're going to do it again and pull through 2. So this will make it just a little bit taller yet than that half double crochet. And we'll go ahead and keep doing that along our work here, trying to keep those loose ends tucked in nicely to our work, pulling through 2 at a time and yarning over. So here we have our first stitch, then 8 more double crochets. We're going to do our last one to make that 10th. Again, just kind of putting it through that larger hole at the end here. And that is how you finish. That is how you do a double crochet. So imagine we've done this however long, you've made a scarf for your dog, whatever it is you're making, and you want to finish your work. So it'll be a lot like a color change. Mine is adding an extra thread in. So I like to cut another inch or 2 off of the edge here and pull it through just like a chain stitch. Pull it nice and tight, and that will lock everything in. That knot isn't going anywhere. Now, we have the 2 strings here. We can either kind of weave these into our work with our crochet hook, if that is all that we have for this project, which is completely fine. Crochet is a great starter craft because it is so cheap to start. A hook can cost, you know, $3, you know, maybe $9 for these really ergonomic ones, and you can just kind of weave in your ends that way. If you did end up getting a kit, it probably came with some kind of yarn needle with like a really big eye on the end, and that'll just kind of fit in your yarn. So to put this one in, I just kind of push it through the center of all of my work, just kind of rough like, just kind of breaking through all of that yarn because I find it tucks in and locks really nice, going through the thickest parts of my stitches I can find. And I push it through a good inch or 2, and then I will put my yarn through the eye. It's easier to do this after everything's through, otherwise you're trying to kind of struggle to keep it on the hook. But here you can just kind of pull it through like so. Cut off the end there, pull it a little tight, and everything is worked in nicely. So here you've learned your chain stitch, your single crochet, your half double crochet, and your double crochet stitch. Doesn't look like 4 stitches there, but it is. So you can see now by going through that bottom of that chain, my very bottom of my work here actually looks like the top of my work. If I had gone through the bottom, it would have looked more like an actual chain with the outside and then a lump coming through the inside here. So you can probably see why I would prefer to go through that bottom of that stitch like that. Your next question might be, how can I apply this to actual work? We've only done 10 stitches, 4 rows. Well, we can keep this going. We can keep doing color changes. You know, maybe instead of doing 10 stitches, we do 20 and make a scarf for ourselves and just keep going. You can make washcloths, lots of different possibilities there with just a small project like this. I actually took these very basic stitches and made a baby blanket for my as yet unborn son. So we see here, it's a little easier to see on the white, but we have a double crochet here, a single crochet for 4 stitches, and then 4 more double crochets. So we can see this pattern is just alternating 4 double crochets, 4 single crochets, 4 double crochets, and then the row below it's the opposite. So 4 single crochets, 4 double crochets, 4 single crochets, and it kind of makes a cool pattern here. As you can see, obviously you can use tons of different colors with that, different color combinations to make any kind of pattern you want. But even learning those very basic stitches, you can still make fairly nice projects. And this is a quite large baby blanket actually, so lots of possibilities. Personally, I wing everything. I'm not much of a pattern reader or pattern person. Just understanding the stitches that you do, so I knew I needed everything would come in multiples of 4 for this project, so I knew I had to do a multiple of 4 for chain stitches around, and then that would make everything even out nice for the rest of the project going up. Since it was in multiples of 4, if I would have had less than that, I would have had an odd end here of maybe 2 or 3, and that would have looked kind of goofy. So different patterns have different multiples when it comes to stitches. This one is in multiples of 4. Thank you for watching Amber Escapes. I hope this crochet tutorial helped you. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. And if you want to see more of what I do, please hit that like and subscribe button. And thanks for watching.